ตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening or good morning. Here in the mountains outside Melbourne, it's a beautiful, still, cloudless night, and the moon is almost full. Another couple of days it will be full moon, but already it's very bright and radiant up in the sky over the hall where I'm sitting. It always reminds us of the Buddha's comparison of the full moon, the bright, radiant moon, with the peaceful mind. I imagine most of you are here listening because you're interested in having a peaceful mind. Just as an idea, it might mean something to you. Perhaps you've previously experienced the mind that is not peaceful, maybe most of the time even. So the idea of experiencing the peaceful mind is attractive. So that leads you to want to learn about meditation, what the Buddha taught, and so on. So the full moon, the bright moon, radiant moon, is a very clear and obvious symbol of the peaceful mind. And the Buddha did say that in its kind of natural state the mind is radiant. We say when it's undefiled by kilesas, negative emotions rooted in greed, anger, delusion, then the mind is radiant, luminous. So who has the most luminous mind? Well, a Buddha or an Arahant, an enlightened being. But it doesn't mean to say other beings, people can't have radiant mind. It's just not quite as radiant as the Arahant. And it may only be periodically radiant. So we all know that. We've had that experience. Maybe there'll be some times when we meditate and our mind does settle down. We let go of our worries, our concerns, the mental agitation. We're not sleepy, and we're putting attention on an object such as the breath, and the mind goes inwards and becomes very peaceful, at least for a while. And someone was saying earlier today that when they meditate in the evening, then they can't sleep at the normal time that they go to sleep, when they go to bed, because the mind is bright from the meditation. That's a very normal experience. When you meditate and practice mindfulness of breathing or mindfulness directed to any other object, and your mindfulness improves, becomes more continuous, your mind brightens up. And that's usually accompanied by some feelings of contentment, happiness, rapture maybe, because of the absence of mental defilements, at least for a while. You get a good rest from all the distracted thinking, the desiring, the wanting, the not wanting. Defilements tend to go in those two ways, don't they? There's things you want, which disturb the mind, and you can't get them out of your mind, all those desires, plans, imagination. And there's things you don't want, memories that you don't like, feelings, thoughts that you don't like, so you want to get rid of them. So this wanting and not wanting fills the mind, and that darkens the mind, confuses us, makes it go further away from the mind of the bright full moon to a mind that's more clouded over, darker, agitated. But if you practice, then your mind brightens up, so you feel more energetic. With that brightness you become energetic, so maybe you won't be able to sleep. Maybe tonight, having meditated, you won't be able to sleep so easily, but that's okay. You just meditate a bit longer until eventually your body says, "Oh, I'm tired," and you fall asleep. I wouldn't worry about it. Sooner or later you will fall asleep. But at the same time, I wouldn't concern yourself if you're a bit brighter, more awake than usual. That's probably a good sign. It may be a sign you sleep too much. Most of us do. So we use the radiance of the moon in the night sky just as a reminder of what the undefiled mind is like, the peaceful mind is like. It brightens up. And you'll notice that even when you're in a mood, we say, "I'm in a bad mood," you say, "My mind is dark, it's gone to a dark place." Say when you're depressed, angry, disappointed, you can sort of sense the darkness of it. All those negative thoughts clouding into the mind, and there's a sense of it's uncontrollable, at least for a while. You can't stop thinking about whatever it is that's upset you or puts you into that negative way. Whereas when you work to clear away the dark clouds by practicing mindfulness, such as mindfulness of breathing, the opposite happens, and a lot of those negative thoughts, the accompanying feelings, emotions, start to dissipate, and the mind becomes brighter in the middle. So it may be just briefly when you say, like when you remind yourself of Dhamma teaching, if you've been gloomy or unhappy, and then you remind yourself of a Dhamma teaching that says, say, "Oh, it's impermanent, just let it go, you don't have to cling to this thought or this feeling." Or maybe if you turn to, say you've been irritated or angry, and you turn to cultivate loving kindness or compassion, you can notice how your mind brightens up at that point. And you can use that. It can be just briefly in your day, or when you're meditating, there'll be periods where your mind brightens up and you let go. You can use that to spur you on, energize you for further practice, because you say, "Well, I've let go of my gloomy, negative state before, the dark clouds lifted and my mind got brighter." And you can do it again. And you may even notice your mind brightening. Some people notice the kind of inner reflection of the mind when they're peaceful, so they're meditating, and they say it's like turning a light on inside your mind. When the mind settles down, merges with the breath, you forget about the body, and you're not thinking about sounds, and you're not thinking about thoughts about the past, the future. The mind can become very bright for a period of time inside. And when the mind is bright, you don't feel sleepy, you're not looking for anything else to satisfy you, so you feel very content, satisfied just from the meditation, from the presence of mindfulness. For those who become more skilled, well, maybe they actually have a light nimitta arise when the mind goes inwards, and it's like turning the light switch on, and a very powerful bright light sits there for a while internally inside the mind, because you've let go of everything externally. You're just with that bright moon of a mind. Of course, the peaceful mind the Buddha talked about on different levels or from different aspects. So there's the mind that is content just on the material level, where we have enough of the things we need in life. You've got a place to stay, accommodation, you've got food, you've got maybe an income, you've got the basic necessities of life sorted out. You can practice contentment with that, and the mind does seem to be brighter because it's not worried about where the next meal is coming from, or how you're going to earn enough money to pay your debts off or whatever. Once you've sorted that out in life on the material level, already your mind has a certain level of contentment and it brightens up a bit. Then there's the kind of contentment, the happiness of keeping sila, living your life in a moral way where you're not going out of your way to harm other people. So you're practicing restraint in your speech, your actions, consciously restraining your greed, anger, so it doesn't come out in your conduct. So you experience the happiness of one who has sila or practices sila. There's a certain brightness to the mind. Often when monks give a blessing, they wish people, they say, "Oh, may you have a good complexion." And that confuses people who are new to Buddhism, because they think, why is the monk wishing us good complexion? Is he some kind of salesperson for beauty products or something, like someone in a shop, department store, selling makeup or different kinds of products? Well, that's not what the Buddha was getting at. He was pointing out that when your mind is more peaceful and content from keeping precepts, keeping sila, your mind is free from regret, free from agitation, because you're not doing things to harm others. Well, then you gain a certain happiness and brightness of mind. Your complexion reflects the sila that you keep. So when you see someone who keeps sila, whether it's 5 precepts, 8 precepts, or a Buddhist monk or nun, they have a certain aura to them. Maybe imperceptible to many people, but if you've been practicing, you notice people who do keep precepts have a certain aura around them. A stillness, a quietness, a pleasantness, you could say. They have this pleasant complexion. And the Buddha would talk about this. So this is the external expression of the peaceful mind. You could say the mind free from regret. A good example of that was Visakha, the lady Visakha. In the time of the Buddha, the Buddha praised Visakha because she had strong faith in the Buddha, kept the precepts, meditated and did a lot of dana, supported the Sangha. And one time the king wanted to meet her because he'd heard of her reputation. So she came to see the king with all her family surrounding her, nephews and nieces and cousins and everybody. So there's a big group of people. And Visakha was sitting in the middle, and she was one of the oldest in the group. She's already an old lady. And the king came in, he wanted to meet her, but he couldn't pick her out from the crowd. She was sitting there, and he was looking for an old lady, so maybe with more wrinkles, more grey hairs than anyone else. But Visakha looked very pleasant, attractive, they say, because of her peaceful complexion. It made her look very young. And the king couldn't recognize her. Then he realized that, and it was explained to him that this is the result of her keeping precepts, meditating, offering dana. She looks young and her complexion is good. So better than any beauty product you could buy. Just keep the 5 precepts and already you'll have a pleasant complexion, radiant complexion. And you see that when people go on retreat or in the monastery, they tend to reflect the precepts that they're keeping. They have a certain sense of restraint, composure, peace about them. If you could see on the inside, on the internal level, well, their mind would reflect that. They have a sort of a glowing aura, even if they're normally not very peaceful and they have lots of stress in their life. while they're on retreat or in the monastery, then that glow is there. And you might sense it if you're doing a retreat, like 1 week retreat, meditation retreat, and then you go home. For a few days you have the glow, it's like a glowworm or something. Your mind is kind of bright, beaming with the Dhamma and the precepts and the meditation you've done, and then it gradually fades and it gets dimmer. Yeah. And that's just something you have to put up with in the practice. The mind is bright sometimes, and the brightness fades and it goes darker other times. And where you really see the change is with meditation. Because if you practice meditation regularly and quieten your mind down, learn to concentrate the mind, and then practice some vipassana, letting go of the attachment to thoughts and feelings and memories and the body, then you may experience the real brightness of the mind on the inside, the peace of mind. You may understand better how to measure your own mind as you meditate. You notice, when you're putting effort into meditation, your mind calms down, becomes very bright, radiant. And when you don't meditate or you don't try very hard in your meditation, mindfulness is not established, your mind is all over the place, and we know what that's like. You're just thinking about this, thinking about that, and there's no real brightness or clarity to the mind. So on a night like tonight, you would say, that's when the clouds have come in and covered over the moon and can't see it. And when we sit there meditating and we don't really try very hard. And if we're honest, there'll be many occasions like that, where you're listening to a Dhamma talk, but you let your mind wander, or you're meditating on the breath, but you let your mind wander. And the result of that is, if you let your mind wander, mindfulness is not established, it's not strong. Effort is not established, it's not very continuous, not very strong effort. Insight won't arise either, so you don't get that sense of detached awareness or separation that comes when you have mindfulness. And so you don't really notice much brightness in the mind because you're full of thoughts. And we know that, we have to work with that much of the time. So it's not a competition. It's not like, one person is better than the other because their mind is more peaceful than the other. That may be true, that one person's mind is on a different level than another, but it's not like you sit there comparing and competing. Although that has happened in the history of Buddhism, some people have done that. But generally we learn not to do that. If someone else's mind is very bright from their meditation and they say, tonight I meditated and my mind was so bright, it's just like the moon up in the sky. Your first reaction might be, why not me? I'm meditating too. Why aren't I experiencing the bright, peaceful mind like that guy? So you may have a bit of dissatisfaction or even jealousy. Why not me? I should have it. I've been meditating for a long time. But we have to accept some people maybe are more advanced, done more practice than us. Some people try harder, do it more, spend more time at it. Some people do it less, and so of course they tend to get less good results. But we have to accept some people might go further in their meditation and they sit there and they're very peaceful. And so the Buddha encouraged us to practice mudita citta, appreciative joy for those who meditate and make their mind peaceful and radiant like the moon in the sky. When we wish each other well, in Buddhism we can wish each other to have a nice radiant mind like the moon. And we can enjoy, even if our own mind doesn't seem very radiant, and if we're honest, much of the time it won't seem very radiant. Never mind, we can appreciate other people do have a radiant mind and be happy for them. Or it could be us ourselves sometimes you have a radiant mind, your meditation, it seems to come together, the effort is there, the mindfulness is there, and the mind seems to go inwards, it's more calm, lets go of distraction. Maybe you've experienced that before, so you can have mudita for yourself, that time when your meditation came together and you experienced a peaceful mind. You can even predict for the future. You say, well, if I ever become peaceful again, I'll have mudita for myself then as well. Obviously it hasn't happened yet, so I wouldn't dwell on it too much. So rather than getting jealous or annoyed when other people have a radiant mind, just be happy for them. That's one less disturbed person in the world, one more peaceful person in the world. It's good for the world. The more the better. And we practice mudita for others. But back to yourself, well, if you're not yet there with the radiant mind, you're more like with the cloudy, murky mind, well, sometimes you have to do a bit of clearing away, don't you? And that's part of what meditation is putting effort into establishing mindfulness with your object, and then working with these hindrances. As I often say, you're caught into a really restless state of mind and you can't seem to stop it. Well, just be with it, accept it and watch it. And you can watch how long it lasts, and there'll be a point in your meditation where it turns and the restlessness stops or fades out. If you keep watching and observing your mind, at that point you can say it's impermanent because you've watched it until it stopped. Because we're not restless, agitated all the time. It'll be there for a while as a mood, as a mental state, and then it will pass. And if you're mindful at the moment it passes, you can have a really good insight there and say, oh, it's gone, it stopped. You've been restless, agitated, anxious before, then you've got it again, and then it stops. Because it will stop because it's not permanent. This is one of our basic delusions, the idea of a permanent self, me, myself. So if you are experiencing a lot of restlessness, anxiety, at that time it seems to be who you are. There's this permanent, solid self who is anxious. And it seems an insurmountable object. But the whole point of practicing mindfulness, meditation and reflecting is to see through that, see through the delusion of self. You've settled down, experienced the brightness of the mind of offering dana, keeping precepts. Now experience the brightness of the mind of letting go of the idea of self that forms around your restlessness, your anxiety. And it's not to diminish whatever you're anxious about. There may be some problem in your life that has some genuine basis. You say you have a health issue or a money issue or a relationship problem. There may be something that you can identify, oh, that's my trouble. That's where the anxiety is coming from, or the worries about the future, or some possibility in the future. It's not that there's nothing there, but here we're looking much more closely at the mind. And we're saying this anxiety is no good for me, no good for anyone else. It's an expression of suffering. So I'm going to watch it rather than feed it, hold on to it. I'm just going to watch it with as much mindfulness and equanimity as I can muster, with patience. I'm going to watch and see how long it lasts until it fades out from the mind, with the knowledge that it will, because it's impermanent, and what's impermanent is not self. It's not really you. And this is where insight can arise as you're training your mind in meditation. The very stress and suffering that you experience that at first seems to be a hindrance, an obstacle, can become your teacher. Dukkha can become your teacher, because when you see that dukkha is impermanent, not self, you learn something. And that's what you're doing in meditation. And where does this bright, radiant mind like the moon come from? It comes from lots of lessons learned. We're learning these lessons every day. Ideally, practice meditation every day. And you'll learn things about yourself. You'll learn about the nature of dukkha, that it is impermanent, it's not self. You learn that when you take things up as self, and you have that strong identity with feelings and thoughts and memories as self, you suffer. And it drags on, it keeps going, doesn't it? And that's the brightness of the mind is gone, the clouds come in, and it just seems at that time hopeless. But if you keep working at practicing mindfulness, turning your attention to the breath, which is very peaceful, very kind of passive object, the identification with all the restlessness, the anxiety about whatever it is starts to fade. It's undermining it. It helps you to let go. So you can see a restless mind is just a restless mind. It's nothing very real, solid. And once it passes, you might feel a sense of relief. Oh, it's finished, now I feel more normal again. And that moment you have to pause and recognize that some dukkha has been abandoned, and the craving undermining or underlying that dukkha has passed, has been abandoned. And that's good. And with that you may return to a brighter state of mind. So one thing you notice as you practice meditation, especially if you're getting used to observing inwardly the mind from the inside as you meditate, well, it's like, it's a bit like the modern light bulbs with the dimmer switch, and sometimes the mind is bright, and the dimmer switch is on full, sometimes it's half down, so it's like you turn the dimmer switch down, and then sometimes it seems to go off altogether and you're just dark. But there seems to be this sort of dimming effect, brighter and dimmer as you go. Then you can learn, well, what contributes to the bright, peaceful mind? Well, more mindfulness, more patience, more insight into impermanence and not self. So if you're always seeing your body and mind as impermanent, not self, your mind will always be bright because of the detached awareness at that time. Of course, when you slip back into the distractions, you're identifying with all the thoughts again, lost again, okay, you have to be patient through those periods. But you keep going by remembering how previously things were brighter, and that you are working to get back to that brightness. And this may not work for everyone, but many people can appreciate this sort of simile of the mind, like the moon, like a bright light when it's peaceful, like the moon covered over by the clouds when it's not peaceful. And you can use that when in the course of your day you're having a bad period, a bad day, and the thoughts and the negativity is coming up. But just pause and bring your mind back to the perception, the memory of the bright mind. Try to establish mindfulness and look at this, it's like the clouds rolling across the sky. And you say, oh, okay, at the moment I'm really caught into this mood, but it will pass because I've seen this before. And all moods and states of suffering do pass. The quicker I let go of it and see it as impermanent, the quicker I'll be free, quicker I'll be happy again. So we often talk about the practice of Buddhism is like clearing away all the accumulated suffering and stress and attachments that we build up through our life. It's not like you have to meditate to get something or get anywhere. It's more about clearing away the attachments which delude you and cover over the radiance of the mind. The radiant mind is already there anyway, it's just you don't see it half the time, you miss it because you're so caught up in your thoughts about who you are and what you want, and what we call craving and attachment. The practice is about clearing away. Like clearing, if you've ever had a pond which had kind of moss or scum on top of it, you clear it away, and then the water becomes clear, you can see through it. Or what did the Buddha say? Well, he said, like, when your mind is full of greed, anger, delusion, you're identifying with it, then it's like all these colours come into your clear water. Water in its natural state is clear, translucent. You can see through it. But the thoughts and the moods that we get caught into and attached to are like colours. So green and blue and red, these are like our thoughts. They come in and so the mind becomes murky. Like water becomes murky, you can't see anything in there because of the colours. As you practice more mindfulness and reflect on the impermanence and the lack of self in all of this mental activity, you realize you're clearing away the colours of the mind, getting back to the transparent nature of the mind, or like water, the transparent water. I've always found that a very helpful reflection, that the peaceful mind, the radiant mind, the mind without attachment is already there, and we're going back to it. So you don't have to get anything or go and find anything. It's already there. It's just we miss it all the time. We keep falling into old habits. A lot of it's just old habits of thinking. Always looking for the next thing to do, to think about, distractions, things, pleasures that we want to enjoy. So we actually make our mind work very hard, which is why we feel stressed and tired a lot of the time. We're letting the mind run with all the thoughts, the negative thoughts, the dislikes and the aversions, and the seeking of pleasure as well. And it's very tiring. Fills the mind up, uses all the energy of the mind up. And that's why a lot of people can't meditate, isn't it? They sit down and straight away they're dealing with the thought, I should be doing something. What do they say? Oh, don't just sit there, do something. So the Buddhists turn it upside down, and don't do something, sit there. Just learn to sit and watch rather than get involved with all this mental activity. Then you've got a chance to experience some of this stillness and the brightness of the mind. Really, you're still doing something, but you're cultivating skillful qualities, the mindfulness, the effort, the clear comprehension, the wisdom. It's not like you're doing absolutely nothing, and that's another fallacy people often think about. Oh, meditators, you're just doing nothing good for yourself, nothing for the world. It's not true. You're doing something, but it's very subtle. You're just subtly bringing up mindfulness and observing with insight the way things are. But what you get back to is just the mind that is clear, radiant. And you don't have to create anything or go and get anything for that. It just happens by clearing away everything that is not the peaceful, radiant mind. All the gunk, all the moss, all the weed, pond weed, clearing it away. Or all the clouds, clearing the clouds away from the radiant moon. So I've given you a few tips or pointers on meditation tonight. I wish you all to experience the mind that is radiant like the full moon. But I'll say just this much for now, and if there's any questions, we can do our best to answer them afterwards.